Good morning. I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. With me on the phone, Ian Burns, our managing editor. His little face there in the bottom left corner there. Looks like a beautiful day in the Okanagan. The roads are clear down here in the valley floor. Moving, traffic is moving. How are things in Ottawa? Nice sunny day here as well.
It's beautiful and sunny here, but it's also about -20, so it's a little bit nippy, but I love days like this, to be honest. I love it when it's cold and sunny, so it's a good day for me.
Kelowna looks like a nice postcard kind of winter day. It's beautiful. And like I said, the traffic's moving. You'd see it in our live shot there. Traffic moving along nicely in Kelowna. Let's start off with Pierre Polyev says that once he gains, if he gains government and the prime minister, he wants to charge people the same as murder for fentanyl producers and traffickers.
Yeah, he wants ma mandatory life sentence for somebody that sells 40 milligrams of fentanyl, which is quite different from the lay of the land right now, because the Liberals introduced a quite fairly controversial bill a couple of years ago, C5, which was designed to remove mandatory minimum sentences, and also extremely controversially, it was designed to allow judges to consider the ethnicity of offenders, and if they weren't white, pretty much they were supposed to try and do anything they could to not stick them in jail for too long because of what the Liberals consider to be an overrepresentation of people who aren't white in prisons. But he said he wants to get rid of that as well, Pierre.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to change behavior, you obviously have to make the punishment more. And right now, how many people are dying each year in Canada and in the United States from fentanyl?
The last data from the US was 100,000. Um, I think that was 2024 or 2023 anyway. So it's usually about 100,000 in the US per year. Um, and in Canada, well, we just had in BC over 2,000. So it was actually 2,250 or something like that for 2024 in BC. I'm not actually sure about the whole of Canada, but it's usually BC has the worst numbers, so I can't imagine it's too much higher than that.
It'll be interesting to see what the people in that super lab that was busted in Falkland just recently, because like they're saying that there's enough fentanyl there to kill you know a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it was sort of like, wasn't it like in the millions or something like that? It was a huge number. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not entirely sure how sensible a way it is to look at it, because obviously not every single gram of that is going to be used, and obviously not every single gram of that is gonna kill anybody. But I mean, yeah, the facts remain that this drug, fentanyl, and all of it's like it has a lot of sort of cousins, doesn't it? Like car fentanyl and stuff like that, and all these other ones. But the fact remains that it's like absolutely catastrophic, isn't it? It's like pretty much the worst drug that has ever
Yeah, and
existed.
it didn't Bonnie Henry recently come out and say we need to have safer supply of like different like smokable fentanyl and stuff like that?
Yes, she did. Um, and John Rustad, John Rustad yesterday, when the federal government announced that they were going to have a fentanyl czar. John Rustad was out straight away with a joke, referring or saying that we've already got one, Bonnie Henry. But yeah, she's been criticized for that immensely, and it's probably worth highlighting that David Eby rejected that out of hand at the time when that was suggested by Bonnie Henry.
And then obviously the Trump tariff talks. I mean, still a big fear in Canada. And then the feds did do something, and the feds in Manitoba, because I mean, I used to work up in northern Manitoba there in Thompson, and they say they want to fix that railroad link in the Hudson Bay Railroad that goes into Churchill, Manitoba. There's like I worked up in that area there, and that's what it looks like. So, um, but they had a
It's a
flood on
great
that.
asset, though, isn't it? That I
Yeah.
mean, you'd think it would be more highly developed and more sort of central to Canadian planning, but obviously it's not navigable for that long, is it? That many months of the year. But I mean, still, it is navigable for some of the year, so that's a
Yeah,
pretty
but
big deal.
that rail line was shut down in 2017. after a flood, but it's been shut down for that whole time, and now they're going to put about $80 million towards it. I mean, we should be working on all ports to get more access to other trade destinations.
Completely. And I mean, that's another option for Alberta, I imagine, to nip along those borders, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and get out of Hudson Bay.
I think the Russians have really good icebreakers, and Canada should maybe invest. Seeing how a lot of our country is in the north, and that's our ocean as well, and the Arctic there, in some really good icebreakers.
Yeah, I'm not sure they'll give us any tips right now. They're not we're not on very good terms. But they have like nuclear powered ones, don't they, the Russians?
I mean
They've
that
really got a they dominate that sort of area, I believe.
that's an area we should likely invest in because that's a great trade corridor. Because yeah, for Alberta, if Quebec doesn't want to play ball, I mean it's not it's Saskatchewan's fairly narrow there, and Manitoba is a little wider there, but you can get to port pretty easy um, in Hudson's Bay there.
Yeah, I mean theoretically you can get all the way from Winnipeg, can't you? All the way up to Churchill, like on water, I mean. I don't
Yeah,
know
well,
how
yeah, and most people don't realize it. And I've driven that road from Winnipeg to Thompson many times. A lot of Manitoba is water. Like it's a there's a lot of water in Manitoba, a lot of
yeah.
lakes.
And you can use that to your advantage, can't you? Because the cheapest way
Hmm.
to transport goods is on water. I mean, it's like many factors cheaper than the next cheapest one.
And
So
there's a lot
always
of
worth
rail
doing
there.
that.
There's a lot of rail there too. Actually, when I was working up there, there was a cabin I was staying at, and the railroad ran right in front of it. And we tried to buy that cabin from the Hudson Bay Company, and they were in no interest in selling any of their property at that time.
Yeah, well, I mean, Hudson Bay, the company, like the original company, they kind of, in many ways, that was the heart of Canada, wasn't it? It was all about that area. It was all about the beaver pelts that they got from there.
Fur
I mean, it would
trading.
be a nice kind of symmetry if that were to, regain that central position in the Canadian economy. Which, if we're to believe all these stories about melting ice and everything, then I mean, that might well be the case.
And the Hudson Bay Company, a lot of people think it's the retail store at the malls there, but Hudson Bay Company is really one big real estate company. It owns, including all those malls in places like Toronto and stuff like that, but it owns like railroads and land all over the place. It is a big real estate company.
Yeah. Not so much, they don't sell so many beaver pelts nowadays, but a lot
Not
of
a
real
lot of
estate.
not a lot of market for that. No. Um, David Eby stepping up too. Say fast tracking 18 mining and energy projects in the face of the U.S. Tariff threat. Um, so 11 of those being BC Hydro Clean Energy Ventures, and that mostly involve wind power. And there's some other projects in there too, a few mines, and with critical minerals and energy supplies. But a lot of it is the green energy stuff.
Yeah, it's gold, silver, copper. Then there's an LNG facility near, sort of like near Kitimat, I think. And it, we had this lament yesterday, didn't we? In this article as well, or related to this story, there has been so many complaints already. Like the David Suzuki Foundation don't like it, and Environmental Defense, that's like a sort of NGO that deals in this kind of thing. And then in this article, they actually speak to a lawyer, West Coast Environmental Law, whatever that's supposed to mean, who comes out and just says, In a time of threat and uncertainty, it's even more important that we, you know, concentrate on environmental sustainability and indigenous rights and all sorts of things. It's kind of like the problem is those concerns have been front and center for the last like how long, 20, 30 or more years, and that's kind of what's got us in this feeble position where the president of the United States can, if he decides, completely destroy our country and our economy, and we're just helpless little worms lying on the floor begging not to be crushed. That's why we're so weak, is because we haven't prioritized things like this. So I mean, it, I think the main sort of story here has to be it can't be business as usual, can it? Not unless you want to be an American colony.
I think we really need to emphasize the Norwegian model again. I mean, they've done a really good job with like a shift to EVs and cleaner and greener energies. But they've also tapped their wealth of resources in their oil and gas funds with their offshore oil, and have built a sovereign wealth fund that benefits their citizens to the tune of $300,000+ per citizen. I mean, Canada
Yeah.
could easily outdo them, but we've had a government here for the past 10 years that is now, even when they get called out by a journalist like Vasi Kapelis from CTV, they basically call her a liar and say that they've been working on this stuff, and it's clear to most people that we've been suppressing our natural wealth that's beneath our feet for the past 10 years.
Yeah, and I just find it a little bit rich, the hypocrisy is a little bit too much to swallow down at times like this because once there's an emergency, all of a sudden it's like everybody's wearing a hard hat and going to some sort of mine site and saying, "Isn't mining great?" And it's kind of like, where were you? Where have you been? Like, what is this about? And it's so obvious and has been so obvious for so long. But I mean, it was especially emphasized a few years ago when the Russians went into Ukraine and started that energy crisis. And all of a sudden, you had all these countries flailing around like idiots, like the Germans, desperately panicking, trying to find a source of energy, and feeling very stupid as they should have done. And one of the sort of one of the countries that was considered to be like the savior, the angel of that moment, was none other than Norway because they'd prioritized oil and gas extraction, so they had a lot of it. So all of a sudden they were the saviors. And I just
Yeah, well,
think, what's
they
with this
not
like stupid short-termism? Why can't people predict that things like this might happen and prepare accordingly?
Well, they knocked on our door, and we've talked about this many times. They knocked on our door, and our government said they're not interested in selling LNG. They would sell hydrogen at a later date, which, like what later date? Like, where's hydrogen at? It takes more energy to create hydrogen than than it's worth selling. So again, we had the LNG to sell them, and we refused.
Yeah, and that was LNG. Sorry, that was hydrogen because there are different kinds of hydrogen, aren't there? And that was green hydrogen, sort of. I think they call it green hydrogen,
Mm.
which is generated by windmills. I mean, the windmill thing. That's not. It's not a very efficient way to generate energy, is it? If you compare like a huge windmill site to one nuclear power station, the amount of space that they each take up, I mean, there's a very dramatic difference. Not to mention the reliability questions and all the rest of it. So it does seem, I mean, I think the Germans and the other sort of countries that came and begged for energy, I think they really did take that as a slap in the face because it's inefficient. It's not really been figured out yet. It's not really like a functional way to generate and use energy. And Canada happens to have an abundance of energy that is very, very easy to use to generate and to send off around the world.
One of the comments from Brett on our YouTube their channel says that the rail yard looks better because he's worked up in Churchill too. So hey, Brett, if you've got a picture, send it to us. If you got a more recent picture of the rail yard, that'd be great.
How many? So you'll know this then. How many months is it actually navigable for?
The railroad
Usually,
or the
I guess it's different. No, the Hudson Bay.
I don't know that answer. I think if you had a
I think
Russian
it's a
icebreaker,
few,
if you had a Russian icebreaker all the time,
or a few.
maybe we should have taken one of those away from them when we were seizing all their assets
Yeah, instead of Lamborghinis and that kind of thing.
and their yachts. And then
Yeah.
another CP story: madness in the air. Trump threats unleash patriotic wave among Canadians. Of course, everybody's like rallying around the flag. But I mean, one of the things they should rally around more so is recalling Parliament and let our democracy work. That's the part that
Yeah,
I'm
rally
confused
around the
about.
democracy.
Yeah, that's the part I'm confused about. We're rallying around the flag, and in typical fashion, we've some of the politicians have found a lightning rod in there. Like they go after certain people, no different than they did in COVID. They said your freedom was taken away because that person didn't wear a mask, and we accuse those people of being misogynist, racist, the fringe, a whole bunch of different things. And we're doing the same thing right now. And we found a few people to go after, and it's not even Trump they went after. They go after like Elon Musk and stuff like that. I'm not sure why they direct their energy towards different people all the time. And the same thing, there's a lawsuits in the States right now for Carrie Underwood for singing a song at the inauguration. So they've went after her as well, and she's launched a lawsuit against these people.
I guess it's because maybe the amount of energy that you can generate now through Trump hatred has diminished, whereas the Elon side that's relatively new. So I think that maybe there's a lot more in there to be mined. But I do think I've said this before. I do think it has something to do with Elon Musk's Canadian connections, being a citizen and his mother being Canadian, some of his family being on his mother's side being Canadian. I think that gives it a different sort of color, and there's a different question there. Whereas Trump is like he's totally American, isn't he? Really, he's like there is no Canadian connection there. But Elon, you can kind of, and I think as well with Elon, he was so idolized by the left and by the environmental left, wasn't he, for so long,
Mm-hmm.
and the tech left sort of thing, if you want to put it that way.
I
So I
mean,
feel like there's it's like a sense of betrayal, whereas I think they've always pretty much despised Trump.
he runs, like 5 or 6 leading companies in leading industries. Like they're all leading industries and leading companies, right? So he definitely, and he's stuck his hand up. Like he raised his hand in this, and I think he may have been a big difference in the U.S. election. Like he went to work in Pennsylvania for the Trump administration or the Trump campaign for like a month and was giving away $1 million a day to potential voters and that, and obviously he's swayed that election in different ways, and people see him as a threat to democracy, and other people see him as the savior of democracy. So it's definitely split a lot of people on him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his influence surely can't be denied at this point. He was the largest donor, I believe, of either party, but certainly he was Trump's biggest donor. I think it was like close to $300 million or something, all added up. And he's also he's the most famous. I think it's probably fair and accurate to say that he's the most famous businessman on earth. He's one of the most famous people in the world, extremely successful, extremely influential. Like often ahead of the curve on a lot of things and has a lot of followers. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that he was a huge influence, yeah. And he also kind of like you mentioned Pennsylvania, he was like completely focused on Pennsylvania, wasn't he? And he put out all sorts of he developed a lot of programs or whatever you want to call them to try and win Pennsylvania, and that'll be for um political science people to figure out over the next few years. But I think he did have quite a big effect in Pennsylvania, and that was all important in that
I think,
election.
yeah, I think he said that that was key. To win Pennsylvania was key to win the election. So that's why he spent so much energy in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's why he went to university as well. So I guess he had a connection. He had a kind of like
Mhm.
personal connection to it as well.
And then behind the scenes, Canada's push to avoid Donald Trump's punishing tariffs. Senior government sources expect the reprieve to be short-lived. So I mean, they're speculating, and right now, the Liberals would definitely be benefiting from like the more turmoil that they can stir up right now on this, and but it's odd that they don't recall Parliament. Which is what you think the right response would be, is recall Parliament and allow our MPs that we pay for, like we're paying them, to find a better path forward for Canadians.
Yeah, but then that would mean the Liberals would lose power, and they don't want to lose power. That's it in a
Right.
nutshell. We might as well just spell it out because it's so obvious, isn't it? I think we would. It's one of those things where you can't like add much nuance to it because that's all it is. They just don't want to lose power, and that's kind of what politicians are
But
like. I'm
it's
sorry to say.
kind of a mixed message then, right? Like like they're talking about how we need to wrap ourselves in the flag, yet they don't want to promote democracy themselves.
Or they want to promote only their version of democracy, which isn't quite the same as a lot of other people's version of it. Let's but this article anyway, sorry, this what you're highlighting here, it's a CBC article. They don't say who they've spoken to, they just refer to them as senior government sources. I mean, I think we can take them at their word that they did actually speak to them and didn't just fabricate this, but it's very it's very interesting. Like the panic, it really gets across the desperate panic on the Canadian side, and how they set up a meeting with Tom Homan, the border czar, as he keeps being called, and they had like a little presentation, and they're like, "Look at everything that we're doing, Tom." And then he went and he's like, "All right, I'll see what I can do. Like, I'll talk to the boss." It just and simultaneously while this is going on, Trump's ignoring Trudeau's calls. So it's almost it's quite a sort of cliched thing to say now, but it sounds so much like dealing with a mafia organization where it's like, I'll ask the boss, but I'm not making any promises. It's like it's well worth a read,
I
just
like
how
the
like
accent
insane
there.
it is.
There
Thank
you
you. I
go.
used to be a mafioso in a former life.
There you go. Uh, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he'll host a Canada-U.S. economic summit in Toronto on Friday, days after the President Donald Trump said he's threatened to do tariffs. It's odd that he's resigned and he's still doing all these things and yet won't recall Parliament. It's just so we literally could have like three prime ministers in a span of like 4 months or 3 months, right? Three different prime
Yeah,
ministers.
that's a famously good way to run your country, isn't it? Have three
Yeah.
leaders in the space of a couple of months.
Yeah, one's making policy and he's resigned, right? He wants to make policy and he's resigned. The other one is, trying to get coronated, and even some of their own liberal leaders in the party are, like saying that it's an awful way to pick a leader. And then, then there's obviously the one that's leading in the polls. So weird.
Yep, it's really, really difficult to try and make an excuse for it that sounds good. I struggle because I obviously really like to, as you should as a journalist, I really like to fully understand the position of all parties in a dispute and like get the very best summary of that position, the best one that I can think of, or the best one I can find, and then put them all together. That's obviously that is basically journalism in a nutshell. That's how you write an article.
Yeah.
But with the closure of Parliament, I mean, the argument is so weak, and it puts you in a really difficult position as a neutral party because how are you supposed to how are you supposed to put forward their argument? Because it's non-existent, really. They're not even trying to defend it. It's just, oh, because we're having a leadership election. That's why. It's like I'm not sure that's an adequate justification for suspending Parliament during a national emergency. But here we are. We don't have a better answer. We don't have a better excuse from
I,
them yet.
like there's a lot of people commenting. What puzzles me is why aren't people screaming to recall Parliament? Like if that's democracy, let people, let our MPs do the work. Like it's just odd that that's not one of the things that people want right now. And it seems like a lot of people just want to protect the Liberals for some strange reason. After they put us in this position, they've had the steering wheel for 10 years. They've put us in this precarious position by not developing outside markets, by not allowing access to the east or the west coast for our energy, and yet we still seem to be so scared of the Conservatives for some reason. And here's our next one: is Andrew Scheer, who was a former Conservative leader, right? He lost that election. Saying that Mark Carney won't release his finances because he has sat on tons of boards, right? And a lot of them are related to the climate change agenda as well. So I think it'd be fair to say, if you want to come and run the country again, and you're talking about scrapping the carbon tax, what does that look like? Especially when the not only one platform idea on your website is still climate.
Yeah, well, this has become increasingly common now as a demand in liberal democracies to have kind of like sometimes expressed as like tax returns and things like that. It happened in Britain because Britain's last prime minister, not the current one, but the one before that, was an exceedingly rich man married to an Indian billionaire heiress, and there were lots of questions about naturally, there are a lot of questions about its finances, and there was lots of pressure there. And obviously in the US, I mean, the tax return scandal with Trump dragged on for many years, didn't it, before they finally got hold of it. But I think there's a legitimate there's a legitimate sort of like justification for this to put it out there, especially with I mean, not just especially, but with it includes Carney. because he's been accused of by the leader of the opposition, no less, Pierre Poilievre, has accused him of profiting from overseas um, natural resources developments while suppressing them in Canada. That's pretty much Poilievre's main attack line against Carney. So yeah, I mean, I think it is in the public interest, but I have to say, again, in the interest of being neutral here, it's a little bit ironic that Andrew Scheer should talk about a lack of transparency when, if you remember, when he lost that election, one of the reasons that he lost it is because he didn't tell people that he was a US citizen. And he had to
Yeah.
go through a humiliating ritual of renouncing his US citizenship, didn't he? So, I mean, politicians are rather deceitful creatures and they like to hide things, don't they? That's kind of
Well, I
just
believe,
to bear that in mind,
like
really.
with what you just said, Mark Carney holds three passports, I believe, and he, in a recent interview, he identified himself as a European, and I think that was when he was working with the Bank of England, though.
Absolutely, totally relevant and very important fact. But it's also important, I guess, in this context, to say that Mark Carney has never hidden his tri-nationality, has he? Whereas Scheer
Mhm.
tried to conceal his American passport, or he just didn't want it to be out there. That's
Yeah,
the difference, isn't it? It's like the cover up is worse than the crime, you know? I don't think people would have been that bothered if Scheer had sort of
yeah, and
been
that
really open
relates to
about that.
the Christy Clark kind of fiasco when she was going to run for the liberal leadership, and then she denied having, conservative membership, and that kind of turned into the end of her short-lived run for the liberal leadership.
Definitely, which he then blamed on her poor French, which was a bit odd. But no, it's true. It's like nobody, I don't think people would have been that bothered actually if she'd said, my friend Jean Charest, because that's why she was there, wasn't she? She wanted to vote for him. Said like my friend was in the leadership election, so yeah, I joined just so I could vote for my friend because he's a good lad, and I wanted him to beat Polyev. That's it. That's the end.
I think,
Like if people and then I quit, she could say. People would have accepted that. And
yeah,
people I think
I
would have
agree.
also accepted that Shia had a US passport that he didn't use,
Yeah, I think
or whatever he wanted to say.
I think the bridge too far for Christy Clark was when she said that it was a lie, and that the conservatives would try to manufacture something. I think that was a bridge too far. I mean, that was kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty hopeless performance. And when you're watching that, when the big wigs in the Liberal Party are watching that, they think, right, a very little bit, a very small amount of pressure has been applied to this political candidate, and she's collapsed like
Yeah.
instantly. So then they're like, all right, we can't. She's not the one. That's basically what it is. It's like she failed the test within the party, and
Hmm.
they dumped her pretty much.
Yeah, I think she dumped herself actually, but yeah,
Yeah, you could say that.
yeah, because I think she kind of caved in right away. I mean, there's a lot of people arguing on our TikTok, which is, like we're trying to even acknowledge some of these comments. But one of the cool things, like people are talking about polls a lot, and you and I have talked about polls. We've interviewed Mario Conseco many times on polls as well. And there's, like we've shown the polls between the Ecos and the Main Street polls, and they're completely different in that. One of the ones that's worth taking a look at is Polymarkets, because they've been pretty good. It's the betting market and it's a U.S. thing. You go take a look at that in the poly markets. I've been following it for a while now to see how they relate to the polls, but I just advise people just to have a look and see what the poly markets are saying for it, because you can bet on almost anything there, including the stuff to hate, like how many times Elon Musk is going to tweet in a day, what song Taylor Swift is going to sing as the opening song, where she visited, in Vancouver when she was in Vancouver. So like it's a ton of nonsense, and also like it has everything to do with elections and tariffs and all kinds of stuff there. So just take a look. Holly Doan, Blacklocks, another story out of her internal report. Parks Canada cut fire preparedness budget by 23% before the fire. Um, and so they're trying to point that out, that why were they cutting that? And so many homes were lost and so many businesses were lost in that Jasper fire. Still not getting a lot of answers.
She's such an admirable figure, Holly Dunn, and she like you can see in the rest of that tweet where she said they concealed it under access to information. Like she is such a like transparency warrior. She's always furious about when governments try and hide things, and you just have to tip your hat to her, I think, really.
Yeah, and she takes zero funding from the government as well. Said that would really compromise her ability to do her job if she was taking funding. She doesn't believe any media outlet should take funding. We agree with that, but we would also like our Bill C-18 repealed so we can have our Facebook and Instagram back. That's an audience we earned over the past 10 or so years. Yeah. Good work by, like, you can go on Blacklocks and you can buy a subscription, and that's how they make their money. They only sell subscriptions. We're giving you this stuff for free.
Can you believe it?
There you go. And then we do have, I think it's Global News, an interview here we want to show you. So go ahead. Good.
To learn, and perhaps this makes me very naive, but that the CBSA doesn't have the capacity in terms of officers or technology, for example, to search the vast majority of containers that are coming into the Port of Vancouver. And we know that's a huge fentanyl entry port. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the ability of the CBSA is to seize and investigate, in particular, drugs in Canada when they're coming in?
Yeah, I mean, we do have good intelligence. We work very hard at it. Again, it's simply a matter of more. We need more people. We need more equipment. We search less than 1% of what comes into Canada. Modes like rail.
Less than 1%.
Rail, we don't do at all. We don't look at whatsoever. We don't know what comes in via train. Again, we don't have the infrastructure. Wow. We don't have the people to actually do that work.
I just wanted to ask you to go back on rail. With rail, is that an inability to search just the products coming across, or is that people as well?
Could be either. Could products, people. We don't have the infrastructure to do those searches. There's plans underway to allow us to do that work on the U.S. side because there are ports where they have the infrastructure to do that. But again, that's really something Canada should be investing in.
There you go. And then we've been talking about that for quite a while too. Just as a reminder to everybody, we're on every weekday morning, just before 9 o'clock, around there. We're on. It's usually about an hour or two. So if you enjoy it, you can find us here every morning with Kelowna Now live streaming. That's we've talked about this a lot. Like there's very little like search in the ports, and even out in Ontario, and the rail ones, where people with stolen cars. Remember the big stolen car thing, where they actually had Apple AirTags, and then they told the police that their cars in that sea can there, and they're just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, there was I think it might have been CTV or somebody like that. Anyway, I went over to like Ghana or Sierra Leone, didn't
Yeah,
they?
I found a
And
bunch of
I
cars.
think that AirTag was still in the car, or like the license was still in the car from
Yeah.
Canada. Yeah. Well, it's I just think in many ways Canada's, and this is a really sad thing, and we sort of mentioned this about the border, like the US-Canada border, which is like it was created in a different time, and it feels like all of these systems that are in place to look at things coming in through the border, including by rail, by sea, whatever. It's like they're from another time when Canada was this extremely safe, sequestered land of, infinite peace, where the only thing that we had to worry about was the Americans, and they used to know how to behave themselves. They've forgotten that lately, but I mean, it was like an extremely safe, peaceful place, and I feel like that's still, to a pretty big extent, that's still the Canadian mindset, which is why a lot of these car thefts as well. It's like it's quite hard for that to break through to people that Canada's not all that safe anymore, and it's, sorry to say, but it's usually foreign gangs as well, isn't it, who've got access to
Yeah.
Canada, and they've opened up it's almost like an export industry where they've come in and they've like opened up a branch and they just export these stolen cars. But I think the sad reality is that just like the Americans had to wake up to this um a lot longer ago than we've had to do it, but just like they've had to, we're going to have to as well, and it means having to be a little bit more suspicious of the world, I think, and that's something that I know a lot of people don't really want to do. They don't want to become like that, but I think that's the only way to survive now.
I mean, it really highlights the way that we've acted on some of these things when, like the Toronto police, I believe, said, like, leave your car keys at your front door so when they break into your home to steal your car, that they can find the keys quicker instead of going through your house. Why not just leave it running out in the front yard? Although there's probably a bylaw against leaving your vehicle running, right?
Yeah, you'd probably get done for that, wouldn't you, if you called the police? But yeah, I mean, again, this is this reflects like how safe and lovely and peaceful and sweet Canada has been for so long, and no longer is. And it's like when there's a big dramatic change like that, I think it's just so hard to like the whole of society, and that includes like the law, police, all the rest of it. It's all going to have to change. And the worst of all is habits and like personality almost. Like the Canadian personality of generosity and friendliness and openness. When you apply that to a situation like what we're discussing, it's a weakness to be preyed upon. It's a chink in your armor that somebody can put a knife through and you're finished. So obviously it's like I'm not saying that Canada needs to become like an extremely suspicious culture or something like that, but I just think certainly when it comes to the law, it can no longer be the case that the police say things as stupid as that, kind of like leave your keys at the front. I mean, that's just so insane. But that's another kind of worms, isn't it? Self-defense laws. I don't know if we even want to go there.
Yeah, so Daniel Smith, there's another opinion piece out there, and this is what we just talked about. Daniel Smith saying we can't have these negotiations taking place with the United States, which is so critical to the Canadian economy, where we have one prime minister that's resigned, that's going to be gone in March, and then the second prime minister, likely Mark Carney, to do some work, and then likely of an election coming up, then likely another prime minister. So we have three people doing negotiations, and that's what Donald Trump and his administration are preying on there, that weakness where we don't have a leader. Like for me, like Canadians should be screaming to recall Parliament and get this over with. Pick a leader and allow, whether that's, I mean, it looks like including the poly markets, that Mark Carney has won this thing by 95% already. Like that's where what it looks like. I mean, obviously the media believes that too because he's on CNN and BBC, international media. He doesn't give a lot of airtime to Canadian journalists, but he sure gives a lot to international media, which is, again, goes back to his passports perhaps. Like, why is he doing interviews in England and United States as opposed to in Canada?
Well, maybe he's more popular over there. Although actually that isn't true in England. He's definitely not popular in England. But I think something that's really important to bear in mind, we're nearly on the 1 month anniversary now of Trudeau announcing that he was going to resign. That was on the 6th of January that he said that. So imagine if instead of proroguing Parliament and initiating a Liberal leadership race, imagine if he called an election then, said, look, I realise the pressure's too sort of great. I know my popularity's sunk a bit, so I'm going to fight an election now, and I'm gonna win it, and I'm going to prove I'm still great, etc., etc. If he'd done that, the vote would be coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
We would be in a position where we would be able to actually elect a new government in the next sort of like week or so, I guess. Although it depends on how long the election would have lasted for. But that's quite interesting to consider, isn't it, for a moment? Because Trudeau still would have been prime minister. It still would have been the same executive, like the same caretaker executive. So he still could have done all this stuff with the tariffs. But we would be on the eve now of a new government. And I suppose the question you have to ask yourself is, would that be better than the situation that we're in now, which is we still have more than a month to go of this Liberal leadership race. They announced the winner on the 9th of March. Then Parliament remains shut off until the 24th of March. Then sometime in the remaining days of March, in that final week, we assume the opposition parties are going to vote down the Liberals. And then an election will be called and we'll be able to vote in May or something like that. And then a new government will come into power in May. I mean, you have to put those two next to each other. Like, which one is better? Which one's smoother and wiser, would you say, in this situation?
And journalists have asked, especially CTV's Vasi Kapalis, have asked repeatedly, why do we not recall Parliament? And we get these answers that are just like, oh, this is we're getting everything we need to get done. But it doesn't say what's in the best interests of Canada. It's in the best interests of the Liberal Party, obviously. And I guess for them, it's a bit of an elite kind of thing, saying they're the best solution. So why should anybody else even have a shot at it? So there's they can see the polls, and it looks like they're going to lose. And if they believe the polls, like some people are saying on here, the polls favor the Liberals, then have the election and get a strong mandate. If the Liberals win and they get a strong mandate, that's better anyway. But Canada needs a leader that can speak to these threats that are being placed on it.
Yep, and that's the logic of what Doug Ford has done as well. Like, he's called, well, that's what he claims anyway. He's called an election in Ontario, and he said, "I need this because of what's going on in the US. I need a really strong mandate. I need to be strong because then I can fight for Ontario and be stronger for Ontario." I mean, that logic, even if that is a little bit deceitful from Doug Ford, that is pretty sound logic, isn't it? You need that mandate to fight. And the worst thing you could have is a prorogue parliament, a minority government that's despised by all the other parties, a leadership election, and then another election on the horizon. So, like, maximum uncertainty.
Right. Somebody's saying the prime minister shouldn't be debating in parliament when there's a crisis, right? We shouldn't have democracy. Anyway.
Well, it's quite interesting that should be said because, and I hate to invoke such a cliche because I find it very tedious myself, and I'm sick of people talking about it. But have a look at 1940 in Britain. They didn't suspend Parliament, They actually debated it endlessly. They debated the impending destruction of Britain and the world as they saw it. They still went there and shouted at each other in Parliament because, that's how the system works. That's democracy.
That is the Westminster system. Canada, again, saying Canada, this is another story from Blacklock's. Canada, too dependent on U.S. pipelines and power grids, the minister tells a Washington audience. I mean, that's obvious from what's just happened, right? Like we have one customer, and that one customer is not being nice to us right now. And now what? Because you can't build pipelines overnight.
Yeah, well, but what you can do is build them in 10 years, which is how long this government's been in power. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a feeble, statement from a Liberal minister, but
So
there you
some
are.
energy right now should be taken on, if they want to do flights and all these expensive flights they take around the world, they should be great getting on the plane right now and getting off in Germany and in France and Japan and stuff like that and trying to ink some deals.
Yeah, or just trying to, but they might have to recall Parliament for this, so maybe it's not going to happen. But I'll try to legislate in any way possible to try and speed up the development of certain projects across Canada. We've seen the federal government on housing and even immigration, but that's a different question. But on housing, at least, that they're willing to use all of the sort of powers that Ottawa has to push the provinces and the municipalities to do things. So why don't they do that when it comes to natural resources?
Yeah.
But like I say, that would require Parliament, and they don't want Parliament.
Mark Carney pledges to be Trudeau's target for NATO spending. To me, it's just like if our national defense is such a priority, why do we have to wait till 2030 to meet those targets?
Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, if it's all about money as well, which it is, which I find that really stupid because you could spend 2% of your GDP on one giant plane or something like that and just waste all your money, and then you would be hitting that target. So I think it's a bit dumb to measure it in just money. But certainly one way to boost that a little bit, boost those numbers, would be to give soldiers and other people in the Canadian Armed Forces a proper salary, like a really, really good competitive salary, maybe double them all. You could do that, and then right away the percentage would increase, and you could start bragging about how great you are and how much you spend on defense.
Maybe divert the money that you lost on the GST on taco chips and tinsel towards our military.
Yeah, well, it's a recruitment crisis as well, isn't it? So that's almost like that's part of it. It's like, how do you spend money on an organization that nobody wants to join?
Yeah.
So I really do think giving them more money and improving the conditions of people that actually work for the military is the key. Like, do it.
Because right now,
they're not, the NATO target isn't you've got to have this many destroyers and this many whatever it is, aircraft or whatever. It's not like that. It's just money spent.
Right.
So spend the money.
Yeah, so you and I've talked about this recently too, that the Canadian complement is around 50, just under 54,000, and it's supposed to be at 77 at ready. And like we don't even have a full complement, and that's still a small military, like comparatively to other parts of the world. And in the United States, since the inauguration, have had record enlistments in their military, which is an interesting thing. They're bringing back, I guess, pride to the military, but they've had record enlistment every day in their military. Can't say that about Canada.
Yeah.
We tried to convince immigrants to join the military over a couple of years, and by passing out passports, and what we got was, I think it was like, we did that story. It was like 110 people.
Yeah, and they would rather work at Tim Hortons or something by the sounds of it, wouldn't they? But I mean, it's a little bit sad, isn't it? That and it's not
Well, I mean,
that's
we
not a
can.
minor crisis, is it? That's a big one. That's as big as
And
it gets.
we can also go back to what Justin Trudeau in a town hall meeting, where a veteran asked for funding for a wheelchair and that, and Trudeau said, no, we just don't have the money for that right now. I mean, the Americans accuse us of basically not spending the money because we rest underneath the umbrella of the American military machine. And like some people would argue in Canada, that's true, that we haven't taken our own military seriously because we just rely on the Americans.
Yeah, and I suppose built into that is the wrong-headed idea that the Americans are like some kind of benevolent uncle that's always going to be friendly and nice to us. I mean, I think it's been obvious for a long time that that's not what the Americans are about. That's not how they do things. They aren't benevolent really to anyone. It's always a quid pro quo with the Americans. And now we've seen that they've elected someone who is willing to really make that clear.
Yeah,
And all of a sudden now we're hopeless.
and that's our next story, because like Donald Trump's solution to the Gaza Strip is that the Americans will just take it over and turn it into a vacation mecca.
Yeah, the Riviera of the Middle East, he said. I mean, it is funny because like he really is. It's like the old Trump. The old Trump is back, and he's talking about building some sort of golf course or something, like some sort of, Trump. What's it called? Trump Inc. or something, like his old real estate company. But I mean, we shouldn't laugh really because this has got people absolutely furious, and he's being accused now of promoting ethnic cleansing and all that kind of thing. But as usual with Trump, there's no there aren't any details. There's just a mad, vague statement that gets everybody panicking and
Yeah.
wondering what the hell he's talking about. And then, not really a lot of information or details after that. Just like the Annex Canada thing. Like somebody asked Marco Rubio about that and asked the question that I would have asked Trump right away when he first said it. They asked Marco Rubio, like, who's doing this? Like, who's in charge of annexation of Canada? Do you have a team together? And it's like, obviously they don't, because it's just a brain fart that Trump
Yeah,
has like unleashed
it's
in the faces of the world.
yeah, he just throws it out there to get everybody all riled up, and I mean, he's good at that. That's one of his
Yeah.
strengths, I guess. So one of the other things that's causing a lot of like ruckus in the United States right now, and I brought this up because of your ties to England, is like one of the things they found through this U.S. aid thing is that there's a lot of funding that's funding global media, and I was curious as why is U.S. aid funding like BBC to the tune of like like a lot of money. um,
Yeah. Well,
like
it's
like $2 billion.
This is the BBC's charity arm, they call it, but I mean, it's still just organizations like this are still just all about soft power, like, basically influence. And you see Global Affairs Canada there's in for quite
Yeah,
a bit as well, and then UNICEF, which will also be funded by the likes of Canada and the US. But I mean, I guess they see it as an opportunity because this particular arm of the BBC, it sort of advertises itself as trying to help people with pretty sort of harmless things like, like medicine, like to try and raise awareness about medicine or whatever, like that kind of thing. But, it's still from a US perspective, it's still money to a foreign country's soft power apparatus, isn't it? And in that sense, it's kind of like, what the hell? What are you doing?
Yeah. I should say $1 million, not billion. But it's just odd that Canada, I mean, is funding it as well. And then, I guess they found that it's funding like organizations like Politico and things like that.
Yeah, and the Swiss are in there as well. But I mean, I guess it's like the BBC obviously has like, it has like a very sophisticated, a very large infrastructure for doing things like this. Whereas for Canada, for the US, maybe if they looked around in the market, they might have found that there wasn't really a rival that could have pulled off what the BBC is doing. I suppose that's probably how they would defend it.
Yeah, and then Chrystia Freeland, she's not getting a lot of press like Mark Carney is, but she came out with and she went after Elon Musk as well and saying 100% tariffs on Tesla vehicles. This one I find puzzling because if their number one mandate was climate change and it was an existential threat and it was like the thing that the world was coming to an end and we had to do all we could to fight climate change. The thing they target is the leading EV maker in the world that is by leaps and bounds the leading EV maker in the world, and they target that one with 100% tariffs. So like which is it? Do you know what I mean? Is it an existential threat for climate change, or is Elon Musk an existential threat to democracy? Which
Well, I think that
existential threat is more troubling to them?
I think ever since Elon Musk started to kind of upset people on Twitter, it probably goes back about 3 years now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Something like that, sometime after COVID when he started. But ever since he's been doing that, I think this conversation has been on the table. It's like how much do you actually care about green tech and that kind of thing? Like, how committed are you really to environmentalism if you're willing to uh, try and, as she's doing here, but essentially wipe out Tesla from the Canadian market. That's basically what that would do.
Right.
100% tariff on Tesla. That would
Yeah.
end Tesla in
Yeah.
Canada. It would no longer be. You wouldn't see them around anymore. Just the old ones. I
Yeah.
mean, how serious are you about the environment if you're willing to do that for politics? For partisanship as well.
And,
Actually, not just
and,
not just politics.
and it's been the MO because like we even seen it here in British Columbia, David Eby targeting red states versus like America in general, right? After pulling the liquor off the shelves and stuff like that. Like what is that? We did the same thing with during the COVID era when they were attacking certain people and making examples. Went after a baker in Victoria there and seized their bank accounts. Basically made them impossible to operate their business because they made a $250 donation to a trucker movement.
Yeah, that's. We said at the time that life is never going to be the same again when COVID was going on, and I mean, how right we were. It's really changed everything, and that
Should,
mindset, that COVID era mindset, is definitely still in place. Yeah, that you
I
can
think
just do things like this.
Chrystia Freeland and the rest of the Liberal MPs should apologize first to Canada for putting us in this predicament where we find ourselves right now, and then at least being like honest and forthright of how do we get ourselves out of it. But they don't seem to want to get us out of it. They just want to talk again, and they're just kind of delaying the thing. We've heard from the Premier of Quebec. Yeah, we're not really interested in a pipeline. Do you know what I mean? Like so then what, right?
Yeah, it's going to need new ideas. But I mean, the thing is, there's an election on the horizon. Quebec is the second largest province in Canada. It's very, very important. Second largest by population, I mean. It's
Yeah.
very important for seats. So nobody wants to alienate the Quebec beast. They don't want to risk that because, because they'll lose the election. But I mean, Pierre Poilievre, you'd think, wouldn't you, when you look at the rest of Pierre Poilievre's platform, you would think that it would be consistent with his positions for him to come out and say, if Quebec doesn't want to cooperate, on pipelines, natural resources, or whatever. I'm going to run a bill through Parliament that's going to do X, Y, Z, and I'm going to make them do this. I'm going to put pressure on them. But obviously, he's not going to say that because there's a special interest group, that thing he despises so much, which is the Quebec electorate, and he needs to win a certain number of seats to have a
And
healthy majority and win the election. And then for the Liberals, it's even more important because Montreal is their capital. That's their HQ. Montreal is everything to the Liberals, and so they're not going to risk alienating them. So instead of a serious conversation about what we're going to do about Quebec when it comes to natural resources, it's just swept under the carpet, isn't it? It's not even discussed.
and then obviously there's a rising again of the unity crisis with Quebec as well. So that remains to be seen where that shakes out.
Yeah, but that's kind of the threat that always lingers, doesn't it? When it comes to conversations like this, it's okay to bully a province like, I don't know, Alberta or whatever. It's okay for the federal government to at least give it a go and try and bully another province. But when it comes to Quebec, immediately the separation threat is in the background, and then it's like, okay, I better back off then. We can't risk destroying Canada, kind of thing. So it's just an unsolved problem, and it really, if you want to get into your history, it goes all the way back to when the British conquered Quebec and didn't really know what to do about it in the 18th century, and they just had all of these French speakers and Catholics like which represented the majority of the population in what's now Canada, and they didn't really know what to do. So they compromised and compromised and compromised, and we're still living in that world of compromise, and it tends to kind of insulate Quebec from a lot of policies that affect the rest of Canada.
Well, let's get on to markets here. Gold up again this morning. It's actually up a little higher than that when we first did this. Well, it's up at right now 28.73 in US dollars. That's a year chart there up there. And in Canadian dollars, it is now 41.06 today. So there you go. So if you had some gold, and gold continues to kind of like reflect. That's not the chart there, Rommel. There you go. We're almost ahead of the game. He's probably thinking we're going too long. He wants to end this here. So crypto, again in the $97,000 range, just still hanging around that $100,000 mark there. So still lots of turmoil in the United States. They're still getting through their picks too. I think that Tulsi Gabbard and RFK and I think Pam Bondi got passed through yesterday. So they're waiting for their team to hit the ground, and you're probably going to see more stuff happening in the United States. So definitely in the news cycle, news outlets must be going up for viewership because there's nothing but nonstop news out of the United States. Picking a new fight every day.
Trump is like, and this was true when he first came down that escalator, 2015. It's been true since then. And he's just absolutely brilliant for news, isn't he? That's why that's in a way why he got elected, because people love to report on his
he's
mad
a ratings
utterances.
abundance, and also good for shows like Bill Maher and all kinds of stuff, because he's a soundbite a minute. And I did watch an interview with Bill Maher and a journalist. I can't remember which publication she was from, but she was even saying, like, even though she definitely had TDS, that she does recognize Trump for being willing and able to step in front of the microphone every day and answer questions, and she said he just tells it like it is. He may not like the answers a lot of times, but he definitely says what he's doing.
Yeah, he's very, very vocal, isn't he? And just like most of the things that he's done, he did give quite a lot of warning, didn't he? Though he didn't say that he was gonna start a trade war with Canada or Mexico. But he did say a lot of vague things about tariffs, I guess you could say.
He did. Yeah, tariffs are his number one tool in his toolbox. He said that over and over and over again. The Canadian dollar, though, it is reacted pretty good to the relief from the tariffs for sure. It's like trying to bang on the door of 70 there. You can see that big sharp drop there, and then it's kind of come back there. It's just under the 70-cent mark right now. If we get an election and we get a clear mandate, I think the Canadian dollar goes back into the 75-cent range in a hurry, especially if we get a mandate where we put our natural wealth in the forefront. We could actually, in a year or two, we could see parity, and that'd be my guess, because we were at one time under the Harper government, we were actually over the Americans. I don't know how many people remember that. It was short-lived, but we were at $1.10 for a bit there. where our
Yeah,
dollar
good
was
old.
actually, what's that?
It's the good old days, wasn't it, back then? Things were a lot brighter in general, really. Canada's GDP per capita was higher than the Americans, wasn't it,
Yeah,
for quite
yeah.
a
Our,
time as
our
well.
earnings were higher, everything was higher. But the Canadian dollar, so again, the Canadian dollar, when it's higher, it's really great for the consumer, not so great for our exporters, like the big companies, because they obviously like to pay cheaper Canadian dollars wages and then sell it in US dollars. But definitely really good for the consumer, which is the bulk of Canada, right? Most of us are consumers. And so really good in that regard. So right now, the benefit to the weak Canadian dollar would be our exporters, and the losers in that would be all the consumers.
It would be pretty good if we had a large manufacturing sector as well, but I mean, we don't, and to get one of those takes decades. So I mean, we
Yeah,
can't exactly put this currency situation to good use,
like
unfortunately.
Doug Ford fights for the auto industry in Ontario, which is great, but I mean, it's a small portion of the world's auto manufacturing. Like we're under 2%, like 1.7% of auto manufacturing, and likely to lose more of it. Stellantis already said they're leaving. So if we continue our EV mandates in Canada and they've dropped them in the US, I think a lot of the auto manufacturers will be leaving Ontario regardless of what Doug Ford does.
Yeah, that would I think that would be the case. There's a lot of work to do to I mean, it's not just Ontario, but I mean, they do have a lot of work to keep that there. And that's remains to be seen whether they're going to succeed. They've got the Americans being predatory. Then you have the Chinese as rivals who seem to have destroyed a lot of other countries, they're in the
Manufacturing.
process of destroying a lot of other countries'
Yeah.
auto industries. It's like a really, really tough time, which makes it all the more, I mean, not to bring it back to Musk again, but makes it all the more crazy that Elon Musk has actually succeeded with Tesla. I mean, I remember like looking at actually at the time, sort of like contemporaneously looking at analysis of Tesla when it was still quite a young company, and people were just like, "This is just like the stupidest idea ever. How could you ever hope to break into the car industry?" And that was back then. It's even worse now. It's even harder now, and it is a bit of a miracle that he achieved that, I think.
Yeah, it is definitely, and in the leading company in the world in EVs, and that's why I find it puzzling. If you have the leading company and your number one agenda was climate, and then you want to basically kick them out of the country, and they are the most North American made vehicle, uh, even bigger than Ford and GM. So they're mostly North American made. So and here's a big change from Google. Google was saying that it didn't want to weaponize AI, but now they've changed their mind too. So they're going to be weaponizing their AI too, because I think everybody's worried about what happened with China with DeepSeek, and we see the drone stuff going on in the Ukraine and Russia war too. And you've seen pictures of China building these robot dogs, kind of like the Boston Dynamics dogs and stuff like that. So like these drones can do a lot of work, and they don't hesitate.
Yeah, and I guess the person that tells them, if they're remote controlled operators, they
Yep.
don't hesitate either, really, because it's just on a computer screen, essentially. But this has been going on for a while, hasn't it? This style of warfare has been going on for a while. Like I remember when the Americans first started to use those Reaper drones in Afghanistan, places like
Yeah.
that, and that was like considered a
Yeah. So
moral
those
crisis at the
there's
time,
a
wasn't it?
there's a difference between those are remote controlled drones, and then there's AI drones where you would just say a message, go and do this, and it would just figure out how to do it on its own. Um,
Yeah, that is another level of
do you know what I
scary,
mean? Like
really,
there's
isn't it?
there's a big difference between somebody actually still holding the controls with a joystick and flying it, because those Reaper drones, right? That was just basically remote control. AI type stuff would be basically you put it in a directive, and then the drone figures out how to execute that directive on its own.
Yeah, it's a very sort of scary world that we're stepping into, but in a way, it's quite sort of it's a logical progression because as long ago as like I mean certainly the US Civil War, you could say even before that, wars have been fundamentally um, about economics really and about industrial production. Like the First World War, it got to the point with the First World War where it was literally just about who could make the most shells, who had the factories and who had the industrial capacity to
Mm-hmm.
make the most like ordnance to then fire and blow up somebody on the other side. And the Second World War again was just like that, and that's why that's the role the Americans played, is that they just produced so much material, and the Russians obviously produced an enormous amount of tanks. But obviously you still needed humans to operate them and go and die. Whereas now it seems like we're gonna sort of like finish off the loop, and it's just purely economic. It's just who can make the most drones and
And
send them
it,
to into battle. Nobody has to die.
and we're at the point where the robots will start making robots. And again, we talk about Tesla. Tesla's building Optimus, and Optimus they plan to have start using Optimus is being used in their factories already. But Optimus, I think their plan is to start selling Optimus to other companies in the next little while. So I mean, they're not the only ones building robots too, like bipeds. It's Figure One is building them, and I think China's got a whole bunch of models of bipeds. I was at the CES just recently in January, at the beginning of January, and the amount of robots there, automation and AI is just like everything from cleaning windows to working in the fields to, and I mean, obviously you can make any of these military applications, right? So,
Yeah, I mean it does when you see it all packaged like that, and when like Peter Diamandis, who you obviously you spoke to, didn't you, at the conference? When you hear like these techno optimists, when they summarize it all, it really is, it gives you a lot of hope, doesn't it, that we could actually be in a world of leisure, like a much happier
yeah,
world when nobody
I
has to
think
do things like pick crops.
if AI works out the way I hope it does, I think we're standing at the brink of an age of abundance for all. Um, and I caution people that all want to hate on Elon Musk. He actually runs a company that's called SpaceX and Starlink, which is probably one of the most strategic companies in the world that protects the Western Hemisphere. It is one of our safe haven things, that because he owns a satellite structure that is the biggest in the world, and that is used. It is a military contractor. So every time people want to get mad, you think about the real threat, China and Russia, and he holds the keys to what could be one of our biggest advances out there.
Yeah, and do you remember when Jeff Bezos, he also signed up, didn't he,
Blue
with
Origin,
Amazon? He signed up. Well, I don't know if it was Blue Origin, but definitely through some sort of subsidiary of Amazon, he signed up with the US government
yeah,
to like
Blue
assist
Origin,
in their,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, whatever it was, yeah. And he got into so much hot water for that. I don't know if you remember, but people were like talking about boycotting Amazon and stuff because
yeah,
he was going to help the American military. It's kind of wild how naive people can be.
yeah. Yeah, we've seen like Elon Musk also with Starlink help a lot of places when they've had, floods, fires, and different natural disasters where he's gone in and helped those people. He doesn't get a lot of credit for that, um, but people forget that in a hurry.
Well, he was
EVs,
accused of a war crime in Ukraine, wasn't he? When
yeah,
they got the story the complete wrong way around. He'd helped the Ukrainians, not hindered them.
yeah, yeah. EV stories. Ford was one of the first out there with the F-150 Lightning, but it's losing ground right now because the Cybertruck is taking. There's a lot of Cybertrucks running around here. I'm sure you see some in Ottawa, but also the GM finally launched its Silverado pickup too. So there is more competition coming for the Ford F-150. And I think one of the things that they're saying is like Ford hasn't put a lot into kind of like revamping their F-150 Lightning. I still believe Ford is going to do a deal with Tesla and put the software, because the big difference between the EVs out there, and I've got some flack from people saying stop promoting Tesla and that. The big difference between Tesla and the other EVs, and I've driven a lot of them, is the software. If these auto manufacturers are serious about the EV game, they should license the software, just like they're licensing the charging system, because the supercharger system is clearly by far and away the best system out there. And why not do the same thing and put the software in the F-150s and because a lot of people like the looks of an F-150 or Ford Bronco and all these things, Ford Mustang and different things like that. Why not just put in something that makes it just exceptional?
I would just say as well, like people that criticize you for talking about Tesla all the time. You're not talking about Tesla as a political entity. They're doing that. You only ever talk about the technology. So, I mean, you don't have just because the guy that is the CEO of Tesla happens to be very political, that doesn't mean that the politics has to infest the technology. You know, I find that a very strange thing to do. In the
Yeah.
same way, it's like there are lots of things. There are lots of like, for example, if you when you had your breakfast this morning, I know this wouldn't apply to you because you hate cereal, but you had your breakfast in the morning. Do you think about like what the Kellogg family's up to, what their politics are? You know, it's kind of like I don't know
Yeah.
why people choose to
Like
inject politics
like I
into
mean, if you think
things.
about some of the bigger food brands and how many people have they, contributed to their illness and deaths with like high sugar content foods and dyes and different things, and nobody goes after them and says like, oh, these people are actually, I mean, the biggest killer in the United States and in Canada is obesity, heart disease, all led to by like high sugar diets and all these dyes that they're putting in. Some, a lot of the stuff's not, you can't even eat in Europe, right? You can't put it in there. Even Subway is classified as a in your country in the UK as a dessert because of the sugar content in the buns.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's classified like a donut because the amount of sugar
Yeah, I
that's
know
in.
that there was something along those lines to do with the brioche bun that McDonald's put out because apparently that's full of sugar as well. So it sounds about right.
Like we're all addicted in North America here to sugar. Like sugar is huge. I mean, I have lost like 55 pounds and kept it off for like 6 or 7 years now because I choose not to eat a lot of sugar. But
But it's hard when it's just so tasty to have a Big Mac, isn't it?
yeah, if you go in most restaurants, it's either breaded and I would say wheat and sugar are two of the biggest enemies. And if you think about the cereal thing you just talked about, what's it made out of? Wheat and sugar, right? Or corn, which is
Yeah.
even worse. Most of these cereals are basically desserts, right? If you want to give your child dessert, just give them a bowl of Frosted Flakes. I remember all the flack that CEO took when he was like, "Hey, if you're down, like, you don't have enough money to buy, like, meat for dinner, why not just have Frosted Flakes for dinner? Because they're great."
Yeah, and the other great enemy of health that we haven't mentioned, there's salt, obviously, and that's what causes like diabetes and heart disease and all sorts of things like that, isn't it? And obviously, you go somewhere like I don't know, even if you just get like a pizza, like if you order a pizza in, the amount of salt in one pizza, it's like that will surprise a lot
Yeah,
of
I
people, I
still I
think.
still think the biggest enemy is definitely the sugar, right? Like the salt, that hypertension, what you're talking about, all that. But like, like if you can cut something on, especially the sugary drinks, right? Those people. We'll get a little plug for the markets here. I convinced my daughter to do this. Instead of buying that fancy drink from, fancy, they got the fancy logo on the cup there, and $8 for a sugar drink with, like the half spice latte thing with the, caramel, whatever, and the whipped cream. And I don't know, there's probably enough calories in there for 3 days. For $8, buy yourself a fractional share on Wealthsimple with a zero trading fee. Open up a Wealthsimple account and trade that. And buy yourself some Palantir or whatever it is you want to buy, and or even buy that coffee company. You'd be better off because once you finish the coffee, you have zero money. If you buy the stock of the coffee company, even if the stock loses half the money, that you still have half the money. You're still further ahead, and plus you're learning how to invest. So buy stock in that kind of stuff as opposed to buying the stock. How's that for a?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And then our meme. We were going to get to this yesterday, but my phone rang endlessly in this, I guess, an emergency thing. We got this meme here, and your friend Doug Ford there. And it says, the meme was, you can't unsee this once you see it.
Doug Ford is he's got a very interesting face and just in general like, his build and everything. He's a very sort of like distinctive character, I think.
I grew up with this
But he
series,
does
and I
look a lot
loved
like
it.
him.
I mean, this is when, CBC would put out these, like, I mean, we only had one channel, black and white TV, and the vertical hold would always roll because we never could afford a new TV. And I watched CBC, and you waited for Gilligan's Island, right? Like it was an amazing show. I don't, it was a, not a, it wasn't a Canadian show though, but it was. I'm pretty sure it was carried on CBC. I could be wrong now too, but Gilligan's Island. Did you watch it ever?
No, I didn't. But I'm obviously familiar with the appearances there, with the aesthetics of it, but I didn't I didn't watch it, no.
There you go. We do have,
Big
it
Doug.
seems that we do have a bunch of castaways running our country right now.
Yeah.
There you go. And then don't we got to remember that Doug Ford's claim to fame was his brother, right? Rob Ford.
Yeah, although his dad, I think, was also quite a sort of big
Yeah.
cheese. Quite an
And
interesting family history Doug Ford has. Apparently, his great granddad, I think, was deported, or it was some sort of really weird situation.
mm,
Basically, sent out of England because he was like a child that really misbehaved. It was like a really naughty child, and so was like effectively kind of like deported to Canada, and then founded this Ford dynasty.
well, anyway, we do thank you for watching, and we do appreciate the comments, even some of the mean ones. Well, we don't appreciate them as much, but we definitely constructive criticism is always appreciated. We are online, like say Monday through Friday. We do have a newsletter that goes out with all our news stories, like that are more Kelowna based, Okanagan based, BC based. And that goes out 365 days a year. Ian does that, and we got some nice accolades the other day for the weather report because you do it kind of a little tongue in cheek. So we do appreciate that.
Yeah, we love our weather banter.
Any final? And again, the traffic is flowing through the central part of Kelowna there. That's Highway 97 or Harvey Avenue as we call it, as it's flowing through Kelowna there. The bridge is operating. I can see the bridge from here. Yeah, the bridge is clear. So our single bridge is clear and running. So there you go. With that said, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now.